Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's Big Data AI Hub seminar. My name is Irene Weissek. I'm a professor of accounting at the University of Toronto Institute for Management and Innovation and director of the center. And our goal with the center, the Big Data AI Hub, is to engage interested stakeholders in discussions around the increasing use of big data, AI, and other emerging technologies. So we're excited to have you here with us today, everyone. In our last few seminars, we've been focusing on other aspects of AI and have looked at enterprise use cases for generative AI in healthcare, which was a really gripping one. And if you weren't with us for that one, you might want to go and look at the recording. And the last one was on prompt engineering and generative AI, including ChatGPT. So today we're going to shift a little bit and we're going to look at responsible AI and responsible use of AI. We've all sort of started to engage with, or many of us, with AI tools, including generative AI and tools like ChatGPT. And we're excited about the technology. It's a lot of fun engaging with it, but how do we use them responsibly? As a society, how do we engage with them and do so in an ethical manner? And what does that even look like? What does responsible use of AI even look like? How do we judge if we're using a particular technology responsibly? So these are all good questions, and we're looking forward to a lively conversation today. Certainly accountants and other professionals can and should be at the table as we move forward to define the new landscape given AI and other emerging technologies. Before we begin, just a small note that this session will be taped. It actually is being taped and made available later on our website, as are all of our prior sessions, as I mentioned earlier. So in terms of questions, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to watch them as we go, but I think we'll save the questions to the end. So let's get started. So we're very pleased to introduce our next presenter, which is Monique Crichlow. And she is currently the executive director of the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society here at the University of Toronto. So please join me in welcoming Monique, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Monique. If you want to share your screen, that would be great.
Thanks, Irene, and thanks for inviting me to share with folks over the lunch hour some thoughts on responsible AI. So just want to confirm that that's up and it's looking good.
It's looking good.
Perfect. So as Irene mentioned, my name is Monique Crichlow. I'm the executive director at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. I've been at U of T for close to a year and just over a year and a half, so relatively new on the U of T landscape. And so something that I think is kind of important to know about me and will inform probably a lot of how this conversation goes is that I have an undergraduate degree in political science and a master's in health administration. And much of my career has been focused on understanding information challenges, as I like to describe them. How do we use technology? How do we understand technology? How do we make sure folks are benefiting from technology? So if I were to say anything about my professional trajectory, I would say that that's probably a common denominator. So just an overview of kind of what you can expect from the conversation. We're just going to give you a quick overview of our institute, what we focus on and what we do here at U of T. And then we'll just get into the conversation. What is artificial intelligence? What do we mean by responsible AI? Can we codify values? And can we develop AI that is truly responsible? So about SRI. The Schwartz Reisman Institute was founded in 2019 through a generous gift by Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz. The gift combines two things. One is the campus. And so if you've walked by the university and college intersection, you've seen a building going up, and that innovation campus is intended to be a place where new ideas and advanced technologies are really flourishing in the U of T ecosystem. And then the other part is the Institute. And the Institute focuses predominantly on how do we understand data intensive technologies like AI from a research perspective, but also from a policy perspective. How are we examining these technologies? And how do we ensure that they can be developed in a way that is responsible and socially beneficial? So Irene touched on this actually a little bit, but advanced technologies are kind of the flavor du jour. They are everywhere. They are fundamentally changing how we understand the world around us. We see this with governments as we try to understand things like the preservation of democracies and democratic values. How do we engage citizens in these topics and ensure that our public services remain relevant? What does this mean for us in international landscapes as we look at things like globalization versus localization? And even how do we consider new laws, regulations, and compliance around advanced technologies? Our economies are changing. How we understand work and jobs is definitely changing. We're seeing great asymmetries between those who have and those who don't. And people are questioning, what role is advanced technology playing in that? And in a societal aspect as well, in terms of how we communicate and interact with each other, how we have information, concepts of geography, privacy, trust, information, misinformation are all changing how we interact socially. So a lot is happening as a result of advanced technologies, and the scale, pace, and asymmetry in which that change is occurring makes responding to these issues, I think, pretty challenging, and also creates a very dynamic kind of landscape. So what is artificial intelligence? At Schwartz Reisman, this is one technology that we're particularly focused on, artificial intelligence, and this is what we'll be focused on for the remainder of the talk. So acknowledging that there is no one observed definition of artificial intelligence, I've selected one that I think quite reflects where folks tend to focus when we think about artificial intelligence and its development. So it's really focused on making machines intelligent, but making sure that the quality enables the function and appropriate foresight in the environments in which that technology is used. So part of it is mimicking the idea of human intelligence, but also making sure that there is appropriate foresight involved. And so I really like this definition. And this is kind of context grounding for the rest of the talk. So transformative AI today, I won't get into it because I knew this group has been focused on AI quite a bit. But when we first kind of started to interact with AI, a lot of the times what the systems that we thought about were predictive systems, and they were like systems that kind of took information and predicted what was the next best outcome. And there's lots of examples like that. I think the Go game that was played, or chess, those are all examples of where machines have played against people and made decisions and won based on predictive analytics. In the last 2 years, what we've seen is a focus on generative AI, and that's what's been creating all the buzz lately around AI. And do we really understand what's going on? And this AI is a little bit different in the sense that it can create human-like output based on your interaction with it. And so that's a little bit different. In the middle, I have the cubed hamburger there, and that's like a DALL-E output. So that's an example of an image generating AI system. And then just to the right there, I have the ChatGPT, and I think most folks probably have interacted with by now. And if you put in a prompt, it can give you back information in pretty good text in a very human-like form. And I think with the release of generative AI systems, we're seeing that human interaction and understanding of information is changing, and that these systems have democratized access to AI in a way that we haven't seen before. So that just taking folks back, so AI development is happening relatively quickly, and this is a great example of one of the first AI systems that we saw kind of come on the scene. It was facial recognition. So if you just look there to the left, all the way up to 2021, these are all AI generated faces, and you can see like in 2014 the face is a little blurry. In 2021, you know, it was pretty good. And if you were looking at, you know, popular news, like last month or a few months ago, we saw the Pope in Balenciaga, just because AI has gotten so good at creating and generating images. And so this is just an example of the pace in which we can kind of see that change in face. I just used facial recognition because it was one of the early technologies. Again, just reinforcing kind of just this rapid development. And if you look at the timeline, there's the images of, you know, cats and detecting cats. And that's how we really first started seeing AI systems. And all along this timeline, you can just see how rapidly different facets of AI have developed in such a quick time. And then just again, just even reinforcing up to 2023. I don't have it on the slide, but you know, what we did see this year happening is increased conversations around regulation, the release of GPT-4, you know, the US Congress calling in tech executives to ask more questions about AI and AI systems and how they're working. In Canada, we had our own legislation that was tabled, and so there's and there was even a few open letters calling for pauses on the development of AI. And so what we can glean from what's happening right now in this moment is that there is a recognition that AI is a general purpose system. It is very pervasive, that we do need to have a set of rules and understanding around how it works, and that we might not all be in agreement around how that should develop. So here are some things that we do know about AI, and I've called this one "The Math Isn't Mathing," and that's for all the Gen Zs out there. But one of the first examples of AI systems kind of failing that was very public was some work that was done by Joy and Timnit out of the MIT Media Lab that focused on facial recognition technology. And what it found was that facial recognition technology was better at identifying males and males of lighter skin than it was at identifying females, and in particular females of darker skin tones. And so this work was revolutionary in us understanding some of the issues around the use of these technologies. It helped us understand and question things like the data in which systems were trained on, and whether or not these systems were behaving in ways that we as a society deem as acceptable. And so this was a kind of a landmark moment in AI, and really questioning concepts around you know, our social values and these systems. And with generative AI, and so I'm just going back to kind of like newer technologies as well, we've even seen things called AI hallucinations. And that's when the model generates an output that isn't really justified by the training data that was put in. So it could be, you know, an incorrect information, distorted images, or just nonsensical responses. Justin Trudeau likes to snowboard in the Sahara Desert. Like, none of that makes sense because you can't snowboard in a desert. And we've seen some of the systems do this. And sometimes it seems very real or plausible that the information could be true, but because we know as kind of intelligent folks that something about that just doesn't sit well together, we kind of question it. And so when AI behaves in this way, when it fails very publicly, or when we experience hallucinations, it raises concerns about, you know, the risk and use of these systems, accountability, reliability, and the ethics. So that's kind of where we start to see this emergence of questions around what is responsible AI, but what do we really mean by responsible AI? So I would say in the space that we occupy at Schwartz Reisman, I often hear different terms, and they're used interchangeably, but I would say that they're slightly nuanced. And so you often hear folks say ethical AI or responsible AI, trustworthy AI. So for the purposes of our conversation, I've done my best to contextualize and define these concepts. And so we can think about, ethical AI really drawing on moral principles around what is right and wrong and how people ought to behave in general or specific cases, or not, or how we would not expect them to behave. So, how should you behave? How you should not behave in a certain scenario. Responsible AI tends to be a little bit more popular in industry and in corporate culture, and it often focuses on organizational principles that are being used to develop and administer AI systems. And the goal of that is really to engender trust amongst employees or stakeholders and consumers about the use of the AI systems that those companies are developing or deploying. And then the last concept is trustworthy AI. And this often is more focused on the technical development of the AI systems. And can we detect or mitigate unfair outcomes and just ensure that the models are transparent and explainable? Can we explain why something happened or understand it better? So those are all kind of like principles and concepts that are used in relation to AI. And I think what we're really asking in this current moment is, can we codify values like fairness or what is just or what is moral? And so what I'd submit first is that we kind of do this all the time as a society. We have different ways of doing this. We have norms, we have licensing, standards and regulations that all help us understand a common set of values, customs, and behaviors. And so on the slide, I have a couple of examples from healthcare. Originally, it was automotive, which is why there's two people walking on the different sides of the sidewalk, but I switched it over at the last minute. But like socially, we understand that hand washing is a healthy behavior. It's good. If you were at the doctor's office, you would expect your healthcare provider to wash their hands before they examined you. There is no fast and formal rule about that, but all the science says that it's good behavior, it's healthy behavior, and we accept that that's appropriate behavior in the context of healthcare and its provisioning. Sticking with healthcare, we also expect our healthcare professionals to act in a way that is ethical or moral. So physicians have the Hippocratic oath that they take. We understand that health professionals are regulated. They belong to a college that looks at their licensing and even their conduct and behavior. They administer drugs that are regulated and can only be prescribed in certain circumstances. We use other informal methods like accreditation to make sure that our hospitals are safe and that they are clean and that they are there's appropriate quality in check, because we expect that when people go into hospitals that they're not that they aren't being further harmed by entering those buildings, because we're there to provide care services. We even have very technical standards and certification around things like medical devices. We all expect that the pacemaker that's being installed will function safely and well. And so these are just some examples in everyday life that help to that help to kind of codify our values and expectations.
You tell me.
So, but how do we reinforce the codification of these values? How do we ensure that there's compliance? So that comes through a variety of mechanisms. There's customs and traditions. You know, in Toronto, we walk on the right side of the sidewalk, but if you were to go to another country like Japan, maybe that wouldn't be the case. And we also understand that customs and traditions can change over time. It was, you know, before it was very traditional for, you know, women not to work. Now it's accepted and mainstream that women will work. So customs and traditions can change over time. And there are mechanisms like our governments who create laws and policies that help to also align to our social expectations. And they help to inform and reinforce what they believe the society sees as legitimate and valuable. And then there's more formal mechanisms like courts, regulatory bodies, tribunals, police, that are all helping to enforce a set of rules. And so there are formal and informal systems for reinforcing ideas of right and wrong and how people should behave. In these systems, we have mechanisms for recourse. So when we believe a rule has been broken or violated, there is often a way for us to leverage the system to find a remedy. And as I mentioned when I first started, the systems and our understanding of what we value can change over time. So considering this idea of you know, values, their codification, and the translation of that to AI systems, can we develop AI that is responsible? So increasingly, the conversation is moving beyond simply principles to ones around what is lawful or what is right. And so increasingly, we've seen folks questioning to what degree our current laws address our concerns around AI systems, and what do we do when they can't address the challenges or the things that we're experiencing in society. So just to kind of pull everything together. So why is regulating AI such a challenge? Because it requires us to interpret values like fair and just, which is actually very difficult and it's context specific. You know, if your children ask you, oh, you know, why do I have to go to bed at 7:30 when my brother gets to go to bed at 8? As a parent, we may understand that we're making that decision because of age difference or obligations that those children might have in relation to something like schoolwork. But the child recognizes that there is an indifference, right? But the remedy isn't to necessarily treat them the same. It's to make sure that the outcomes are appropriate for their specific context. AI is used in a number of decision-making processes that we interface with every day. So on our phones, we have tons of apps that we use to help us get through our day, to do our banking, to help us travel to the back and forth to the cottage, to help us talk and communicate with friends and family. And sometimes it's to access services in you know, at banks, airlines, and all sort of automated systems. But we don't always know when we're interfacing with these systems and when they're being used to make decisions. And as demonstrated previously, we don't always understand how these systems themselves come to decisions. I had also spoke about the scale and impact for collective harm. And so here in the context of AI, we see this as further reaching because how pervasive AI is. If I treat one person unfairly, or if I do something to one person, it's a direct one-to-one, where with AI, because it can be replicated in, you know, I could create a chatbot that can just kind of do what I want it to do. Instead of me just being able to do something to one person, I can now do something to 10 people or tens of thousands of people by virtue of leveraging technology. And it's all happening just really, really quickly. So what's happening globally as a response to that? So what we are seeing, and these are just examples from Western society, there are examples of similar legislation emerging in countries like China or in the African continent. For example, Nigeria has actually just started to introduced a number of legislation that is also pointing towards data protection and the regulation of technology, specifically AI. But in the Canadian context, what we do see is that, we are interested as a society in having rules that govern how artificial intelligence is used and what should happen in the instances when our expectations aren't met. So Bill C-27 is new. It just went through second reading. It hasn't been passed yet, and it addresses a number of these concerns based on an impact-based approach. In the United Kingdom, they also have some legislation that tends to be focused on pro-innovation and making sure that there's flexibility maintained as AI systems are developed. So, so really focused on the idea of the development of their AI ecosystem. And then in the European Union, there's an Artificial Intelligence Act that's being proposed, and we're also seeing this in relation to other legislation like GDPR that focuses on data protection. And so what we're seeing is that there are differences in how people are interpreting and understanding protections against and protections of information and the use of AI. In the United States in particular, there's legislation that's happening at the various state levels, but federally, the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which was tabled earlier in the year, which is not law, it's just it's a guiding principle on how regulation could be adopted, and a roadmap has come up. We also see in the United States, particularly in the context of the national defense, an increasing desire to use existing regulation to make sure that AI systems are working in a way that is socially acceptable. So folks are relying on the law to codify some of our values and expectations. Outside of the law, just bringing it down a level is the idea of AI standards and certifications. And so we have to remember that AI is a technology that can benefit from having socio-technical standards. So we do see groups like ISO and NIST and software companies or sectors that are focused on understanding how AI can be developed in a technical standard way, especially if we think about AI as a commodity or something that's going to be exported to different countries. So having standards can actually be quite helpful in having the technologies adopted and move across boundaries. So what does this actually mean? Just kind of bringing it back to the organizational level and for folks as they think about approaches for responsible AI. So I think the main takeaway is that the context in which AI will be used matters. If you're in an organization and you are going to implement an AI system, you should really be thinking about the process that is going to be impacted by the introduction of that AI. Do we have the right leaders and stakeholders at the table to inform not only how that process currently works, but how it ought to work? And are they there to champion and oversee these ideas and listen to folks that are developing these systems? And that really has to be multi-stakeholder. What we see, particularly in an academic space, is that interdisciplinary approaches to AI systems are one of the reasons we see improvements or even a leaning towards this question of how do we align AI systems to our social expectations. Training and education. Are we ensuring that staff understand generally what an AI system is, what AI is, and what an AI system is, how it's used in your organization or will be used in your organization? Are folks in the impacted process area being trained on AI? Do they understand when they will be interacting with AI and the expectations that might come as a result of their interactions with AI. So a lot of it has to be around training and education. Documentation and guidelines. So are we documenting our practices? Are there policies and procedures that we can point to that demonstrate how these systems were built and being used? Particularly in the instance of having to adapt or change them, or even if there's questions about things like their explainability or transparency. Do we understand how, what we put into this process, the system? What does the data look like? Risk audit and response. And so this really just comes down to making sure that we are monitoring, managing, auditing our practices, and we're being responsive to any changes that need to happen, because as AI is adopted, it won't necessarily happen all at once. I think most organizations tend to focus on a particular area where they think they will get improvements and easily and without too much interruption to folks. I think when you start to get into more complex systems of AI and AI human interaction, then making sure that all of these 4 check boxes are kind of top of mind are really, really, really important. You're going to want to have a good program of folks around thinking about how AI can be adopted and employed within your organizational context. So that's it for me. That's the end of the presentation. So I'll stop sharing, and I guess we can take any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Monique. That was great, and great to see the regulation that's actually in progress right now of different areas. As we've noted lately, and you mentioned it, there's some very significant people in the space that were some of the creators of the original AI, like Jeff Hinton, calling for a pause and saying, we're at the point now where this is moving faster. I often think, maybe 5 years ago, we used to say, well, this is narrow AI and it only does one thing. And then we said, oh, is this general AI? And general AI would be on par with human intelligence, whatever that is. And we're not, and people used to say, we're not there. Well, now I think we've seen in generative AI, we're probably getting around there. And now I think people are starting to think about the super AI beyond human intelligence. There's a risk there. And those conversations are starting to happen. So you mentioned the speed at which this is all happening. It's incredibly fast. It's actually, exponentially increasing right now. And the risk is, it may get out of control. And that's why that regulation is critical. And it struck me when you were talking, there's kind of 3 phases that we have to think about the control. It's in advance. Let's design the system or help it train itself, whether we're using machine learning, but what is it we're trying to do? So we have to think about that design. And then during, as you mentioned, we have to monitor what's happening, and how do we monitor it? And sometimes it is a bit of a black box. But then, your research, you have to look back and say, well, what's the output? What decisions have been made? And that is quite fascinating about the gender and misidentification, being focused on, women of darker skin. That's interesting to me. And that's a problem. That's clearly a problem. So we have to be monitoring and thinking about this actively along the way. And I don't know if you have any comments on any of that.
I think that's exactly right, Irene. And if I were to take kind of one lesson learned from being at Schwartz Reisman, it would be different perspectives. So, we pride ourselves on being an interdisciplinary research unit, and having different perspectives. And first of all, it takes coming to a common understanding around kind of the question and what are we trying to examine. But it also provides challenges to maybe commonly held ideas about the way that something ought to behave. And I think that's where the true benefit and value of these systems will be realized. It has to be the perspective of more than one person. It has to be, I think, a perspective that is reflective of kind of, in the generalist terms, our social composition. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned that what's happening with these technologies is there's this democratization piece that's going on now, and more people do have a voice, which is good. More people do have access. I mean, probably many of us on this call have gone on to OpenAI, for instance, and just played around with generative AI. And that's important, so we have to reflect that when we're making these decisions.
Absolutely. I think that in the next iteration of engagement, we'll see is probably from the citizens themselves as they interact with these systems more. I think that will help us better understand what we expect from AI systems and how we expect our governments and our businesses to respond to our kind of held beliefs about these systems. And so I think as AI gets into the hands of more everyday people, it's an opportunity for us to learn it and benefit.
Absolutely. And I see in the chat we've got a couple of
let's go to the chat.
Yeah. I think Morgan Jail's got a question. And Monique, do you want to answer those yourself?
Morgan's question is, you mentioned at one point democratizing impact of giving the public free access to a program like ChatGPT. Could you talk more about the potential short-term or long-term impacts of encouraging general public to have at it and experiment with the new AI technology, especially with reference to the idea of responsibility? Sure. So I think that there's two things. We have to recognize that the folks that are interacting with ChatGPT, in particular in this context of this technology, are folks that have access to a number of things already. Computers probably have some sort of literacy around data and information, have some interest in knowledge around AI systems. And so that's not everybody in society. It's a subset of people in society that are already interacting with those AI systems. I think that, when we start to think about the broader rollout of those systems and what we consider to be the appropriate prerequisites, there's definitely questions to be asked around what does this mean for education of children and their interaction with these tools? What does this mean when we're using these tools for decision making, knowing that the information isn't always correct? And so we have seen folks responding with policy. So they're in the courts. I think even up to yesterday in Yukon, lawyers are required to disclose when they're using ChatGPT or similar type generative AI tool in their legal research. So we see people are aware very quickly in the short period of time that this technology has come out that we want information, we want disclosure, because there's a reliability question. Part of it is when we have at these systems, we're actually helping to improve how they work too. So there are pluses. We understand how they work. And then we also see these companies looking at opportunities to what I believe is improve them. So, OpenAI has done, I'm using them because the content of the question was around ChatGPT, but they've done a call for, folks who want to research democratic inputs into generative AI systems, and in particular their ChatGPT system. And they've also just stood up a safety alignment team. So they themselves are responding to a lot of what we're seeing happen socially. People saying we need rules, we need guidelines, we need information. This technology may not be appropriate for everyone, and they're trying to understand that. So I think exactly what we need to be doing as a society in our respective roles is happening right now. There's a question from Julia Park. What are some of the disciplines or disciplinary perspectives that you feel are currently underrepresented in key AI-related discussions? Oh, Julia. So I won't say are underrepresented. What I will say is when I interact with someone from a different discipline, I always feel like I walk away more informed specifically when I talk to folks in the social sciences and the humanities. Naturally, AI was birthed in our STEMs. And so you have a lot of computer scientists and engineers and mathematicians who understand how to use and develop these systems. And so I think when I come across historians who are interacting with these systems and providing frameworks of understanding from their disciplines, I learn a little bit more around kind of things like social behaviors and histories of the use of technology and how that might play out in the context of AI. I've seen a lot of linguists kind of respond to what's happening, particularly around ChatGPT. Something that hadn't occurred to me is that these models are actually picking up a lot of normal language, right? So it's kind of the middle ground around language. It isn't picking up unique words or high-end vocabulary, because it's trying to predict it's trying to provide an output that is relatively normal and could be understood at a certain level. So how language is interacting with this is, specifically from a linguistic perspective, is another perspective I think that's unique. And so I don't think there's any disciplines that are, I guess what I'm saying is I think all disciplines, doesn't matter where you're sitting, should be thinking about AI and AI systems and how their theoretical frameworks around thinking, knowing, understanding, examining might be able to help solve problems or better understand these technologies as they're developed. But we have a lot of, I guess, on the other side, we have a lot of folks in STEM who are already kind of doing this work. So I think the call is for social scientists and humanists to become more engaged, and for us to create space for them to become more engaged.
And that's important because it can be intimidating.
Yes, that's it. I think that's exactly right. How do you see this linked to other immersive technologies like VR, XR, and the acceleration of the metaverse? That's a great question. And I think that, I think that, the fundamental questions around the use of these technologies in terms of what do we find to be socially acceptable is what will kind of underpin, our examinations of things like the metaverse. There are new economies that are spurting up because of those environments. Are they stable? No, I don't know. But we've got all sorts of things that are cropping up. There are also benefits to these technologies, and I think we often focus on a lot of the harms that are happening. But if I think about things like VR technology, there's a lot of benefits to having augmented reality, especially if I have if I have a disability or a vision impairment. Maybe there's something that these technologies can help me experience differently. And I think that we have to think about, we can't just think about the harms and shutting them down. We should really think about who benefits and how can we benefit. Where do we anticipate the risks happening? Are they now, or are they in the future? And if they're in the future, like how can we continue to develop? If they're now, what do we need to address? So I actually think it's, it's not, the fundamental core to all of these issues is probably the same set of questions. So Otto Young is asking me what I think about this is the Sarah Silverman case against OpenAI. So folks are suing OpenAI for IP. It was IP infringement. And I think this is what we want to see. I think we want to see people reacting and responding to AI systems, particularly in the context of our legal systems. One of the ways that they evolve and adapt is when people challenge it. So I think that's what we want to be seeing. I also think that we actually do need to be very mindful of original thought and idea, and who benefits when ideas or creativity is replicated. And so it may not be an either or, it might be just redefining. So I think that case is exactly what we want to be happening. And I think there's probably going to be a couple more cases to help us understand, if there are opportunities in our legal system to do things differently, or does our legal system uphold our social expectations? So the next one is a bit long, and if I get it wrong, I'm sorry. So do I think the goal of all these legislations is to build a single unified set of rules around AI? So AI governance, I'm paraphrasing, and I think the answer is no. No, I don't think that's the goal. I think that ought to be the goal. The challenge is that some groups came out really early with their thinking around data protection and artificial intelligence. And other groups chose to wait. One of the things that I think about, and this goes back to kind of my political science lens, is that as if we accept that AI is a technology, there are some groups in society where AI forms, foundational pieces of their economy. And so having those technologies develop and innovate is really important for economic prosperity and jobs and all sorts of things. And so there's a lot of benefit for making sure that they can continue to grow and flourish, but also, outside of all the other benefits that AI has. And so I think there's a lot of variability in Canada and the US. We have a lot of these companies, and that may not be the case in other parts of the world. And so I think what you're seeing is people responding to how they're interacting with those systems in those spaces. I think the goal should be a cohesive and coordinated approach, but just understanding that that doesn't necessarily mean that it looks uniform or the same across geographies.
And that's an important point too. Like, we don't all think the same, and our societies and environments globally are different. So there should be some sense of reflecting that your own part of the economy, the geography, whatever it is that you think about when you're living in a space, right? So a common one is a nice idea, as you say, and there may be some common threads, but it should also reflect the regional differences. That's the reality, right? Black box AI
Huge
decision.
swimmer on black box AI decision making. The AI is able to make decisions with hidden layers, and no one is sure how these hidden layers work. Also, are there hidden layers used often in machine vision? So, not a computer scientist, but what I will say is that the black box challenge is exactly what is one of the reasons why people are questioning things like explainability or justification of AI systems, because we don't know, because these models work by training themselves, and at some point we are no longer able to understand how they train themselves because of how complex the decision trees become. I think that that's going to continue to be a challenge for AI. The question is not so much about, do we not understand, but what happens when those systems are being used in places where decision making happens and there is an impact to someone that is adverse? How do we respond and how do we behave? I think there's also the question of the appropriate context for these technologies, and that's why I keep saying, not all AI may be appropriate for all contexts. We might decide in Canada that we don't want to have weapons of our defense weapons with all sorts of AI systems and autonomous systems and VR systems making their own decisions about kind of when to fire. We might decide that it's socially beyond what we think is acceptable. So I think that's the main point around AI and AI systems, is that we do understand that sometimes these systems make decisions that we cannot understand and interpret. So we need to have processes and we need to be able to take action when that happens. I think that's the critical point. And the last one here is AI is learning based on historical data. I think it has become evident that this has brought about the notion of bias in the output of generated by AI. Yes, in particular in use of AI and predictive tools in criminal justice in the US. How do you see us removing historical bias or discrimination in data used that AI systems replacing decision making? I would think that this would apply to medical data as well. Most medical data is based on most medical data is based on a male patient. So I think the question around data and data bias is when we can't exclusively ask the question around the data being biased, and we won't be able, my personal belief is that we won't be able to solve for data bias. If we believe that if there is bias in the data, it's reflective of systemic biases. And so I think our responsibility is to addressing the systemic biases in which these data are generated and collected in the systems in which these data are used. So specifically in the context of criminal justice, it may be that, you know, that the solution is not necessarily to focus exclusively on the data, but to focus on how decisions are made in the context of criminal justice and in restoration. So, and this is like, there's lots of information and cases out there around recidivism and legal systems and decision making. And I think the one common denominator is that if you're interested in data bias, then you have to also be interested in resolving systemic bias, because the one does not exist without the other. So in the context of, you know, specifically health and medical data, and it being predominantly male, you know, that speaks to how that environment is constructed towards bias. Maybe, you know, how can we create a more inclusive practice? How can we create a practice around medicine and research and examination that's considerate of our general population? And I would say just even more broadly, as AI develops, you know, it can't be just, you know, one group of folks that are thinking about how these systems are designed and developed. I think your question around bias data and kind of who's at the table is exactly why that question of the stakeholders, the different views, understanding how these systems are used, where they will be used, when they will be used, how decision making is happening, and how we're evaluating that transcends like any sort of kind of case, whether it's in an organization or whether it's in a justice system.
Yeah, it's interesting because the question on the black box and decision making and the neural networks and machine learning, I mean, we can't predict how any human being is going to act, right? I mean, that part is replicated very nicely,
Yes.
human intelligence, right? Because we don't know why somebody does what they do. But what we do need, as you say, Monique, is the processes to monitor and measure and sort of watch it and then be able to take action. There's two things you said there, and I like that. We have to monitor it. We have to measure things. We have to look at the outcomes, and then we have to be able to do something. And that is the two important pieces that I think I take out of that. But yeah, oddly enough, we have actually got this artificial intelligence to the point where it is mimicking the way humans make many of our decisions, i.e. that is not always rationally. Very interesting. Any last questions we've got a couple of more things there. Anything? Oh no, I think, how do I access previous webinars? If you just go to our website, just type in Big Data AI Hub and IMI into your search engine, and you'll see, I'll actually put a little link there. We've got all the last presentations in there, and we can, certainly we'll have this one up very shortly. Just let me get this sent it to everyone. You're welcome to go and watch. I mean, we're happy for you to watch them after. And if you have questions, reach out to us. Anybody have any last minute, any comments or questions? Because we're coming up to the hour. Although we save a bit of extra time, we generally like to get this done in an hour because we're respectful of your time. So I just want to say special thanks to Monique for this very engaging and frank conversation. I think Monique, you skillfully handled sort of many different questions and thought about things from different perspectives. And no doubt that's from all your work at the Schwartz Reisman Institute, which is doing some incredible things. So thank you very much, Monique, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Irene.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I'll probably be reaching out to you with future questions or further questions. And thanks to the rest of you for joining us and being on this very interesting and sometimes frightening AI journey. And hopefully we'll have many more conversations. So we'll see you at the next seminar, which will probably be in the fall. We'll announce our new session, but we'll continue to focus on AI, I think. So that's it for us, and take care, everyone, and thanks again. Bye-bye.